I never thought my entire world could crumble from a single kiss. But there I was, standing frozen like a statue outside the main entrance of our favorite nightclub district, watching Mason Hale's lips locked with another man's. My boyfriend of 2 years, my alpha boyfriend, the man who had once made my omega instinct sing with contentment, was making out with a complete stranger right in front of everyone, as if our relationship meant absolutely nothing. The autumn breeze carried whispers from passing patrons. "Oh my God, is that Mason?" someone murmured as they walked by. I couldn't move. My chest felt like it was caving in, a literal physical pain that made it hard to breathe. My omega instincts were screaming betrayal, rejection, loss, but I couldn't even whimper. I just stood there, my scent spiking with distress so strongly that I could smell it myself. Sour, sharp, wrong. The worst part wasn't just seeing him with someone else. It was the moment Mason's eyes met mine. There wasn't an ounce of guilt in them, not even a flicker of remorse. "Ethan," he called out to me as if nothing had happened, his voice carrying that casual tone he used when discussing weekend plans. The other guy, whoever he was, immediately stepped back, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden appearance of what was obviously Mason's boyfriend. He mumbled something about having to get back to his shift and practically fled the scene. Mason approached me with that same stupid grin I'd been looking at for 2 years, the one that used to make my omega heart skip, the one that now made my stomach turn. His dark hair was slightly messy from his impromptu makeout session, and he had the audacity to look completely unbothered by what had just transpired. His alpha pheromones were still elevated. Not the warm, protective scent I remembered, but something sharper, something that smelled like someone else. "Look, I can explain," he started, reaching out as if to touch my arm. "Explain what?" My voice came out as barely a whisper, but I could hear the tremor in it. "Explain why you've been ignoring me for the past 2 months? Or explain why you told me you were too busy with family issues to hang out?" The mask slipped from Mason's face. His expression shifted from fake innocence to something harder, more honest, and infinitely crueler. That artificial sweetness he'd been wearing disappeared completely, replaced by an almost annoyed impatience. "Ethan, come on. You knew this wasn't serious." He shrugged as if he were discussing the weather, not destroying what I thought was the most important relationship of my life. "We're young. We're supposed to explore." Explore. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had explored with him. I had shared everything with him. My first kiss, my first relationship, the first time I'd ever said, "I love you," to another person. Every milestone, every vulnerable moment, every piece of myself I'd never given to anyone else. And he had been exploring too, apparently, just not exclusively with me. "You told me you loved me," I said, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed. I hated myself for crying in public, hated that other patrons were probably watching this humiliating scene unfold, hated that I was giving him the satisfaction of seeing how much he'd hurt me. "I did love you, Ethan. I still care about you." Mason's tone softened slightly, but it felt patronizing rather than genuine. "But love doesn't mean ownership, right? We never talked about being exclusive." The lie was so blatant, so casually delivered, that it took my breath away. We had talked about it multiple times. He'd been the one to bring up exclusivity, to talk about our future together, to make plans that extended beyond next month. But now he was rewriting history, as if those conversations had never happened. He reached out to touch my shoulder, a gesture that once would have comforted me, but now made my skin crawl. My omega instincts recoiled. His scent was wrong now. Tainted. I jerked away from his touch, taking a step backward as if he were something dangerous. That's when my phone buzzed against my leg. The timing was so perfect it almost felt like divine intervention. I pulled it out with shaking hands and saw a text from my mother. "Ethan, your father has found a good proposal. Lucas Brooks, doctor, 25, from a very good family. Can you come home to discuss?" I stared at the message for a long moment, the words blurring slightly through my unshed tears. An arranged marriage proposal. 6 months ago, I would have dismissed it immediately, would have told my parents I wasn't ready, that I was in love with someone else. But standing there, looking at Mason's impatient expression as he waited for his response to his casual destruction of our relationship, the idea didn't seem so impossible anymore. "You know what, Mason?" I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You're absolutely right. This wasn't serious." I could see confusion flicker across his face. He'd expected tears, arguments, maybe even begging. He hadn't expected calm acceptance. "I'm glad we're on the same page," he said cautiously, as if he wasn't quite sure what game we were playing now. The taste in my mouth was bitter and metallic, the taste of rejection, of betrayal, of 2 years of my life being casually discarded. But there was something else there, too. Something I hadn't expected. Relief. The wondering was over. The anxiety about where I stood with him, the constant worry about why he seemed so distant lately, the nagging feeling that something was wrong, all of it could finally stop. "We are," I said, sliding my phone back into my pocket without answering my mother's text. "And I'm done exploring with you." For the first time since this entire scene began, Mason looked genuinely surprised. Maybe even a little hurt, though I suspected it was more wounded pride than actual emotional damage. He was probably used to being the one who ended things, used to leaving his partners devastated while he moved on to the next adventure. "Ethan, wait," he started. But I was already walking away. I could feel his eyes on my back as I crossed the parking lot, could imagine him standing there trying to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to turn around, wanted to see his face, wanted to know if he was feeling even a fraction of what I was experiencing. But I didn't. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, until I reached my car. It wasn't until I was safely behind the wheel that I allowed myself to fall apart. The tears came then, hot and angry and heartbroken all at once. I sat in the parking lot and cried for the relationship I'd lost, for the future I'd imagined, for the trust that had been so carelessly shattered. But underneath the pain, there was something else growing. A tiny seed of determination, of defiance. Mason thought he could discard me like yesterday's news. Fine. I would show him exactly how easily replaceable he was. I would show him that I didn't need him to be happy, that I could move on just as quickly as he had. I pulled out my phone and typed a response to my mother. "I'll be home in an hour. Let's discuss the proposal." As I drove home, I tried not to think about Mason's hands and that stranger's hair, tried not to replay the casual cruelty in his voice. Instead, I forced myself to think about the future, about Lucas Brooks, whoever he was, about the possibility of starting fresh with someone who wouldn't take me for granted. Maybe arranged marriage wasn't the romantic dream I'd once imagined for myself. But after what I'd just been through, romance seemed highly overrated anyway. The smell hit me the moment I walked through the front door. The rich, complex aroma of biryani with all the traditional spices, cardamom, cinnamon, star anise, saffron, created a warm, welcoming cloud. My mother, Helen, only used her special recipe for guests, which meant this conversation about the marriage proposal was going to be more formal than I'd anticipated. "Ethan, come here." My father called from the living room. His tone was serious, but not stern, the voice he used when he was worried about me rather than angry. I found both my parents sitting on the couch with various papers spread across the coffee table like they were preparing for a business meeting. "I already know what you're going to say," I announced before either of them could launch into their prepared speech. I settled into the armchair across from them. "Arranged marriage, right?" My mother's face immediately brightened. Her dark eyes sparkled with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen since my graduation. "Yes, Lucas Brooks. He's a doctor, a pediatrician, 25 years old, from a very good family. Perfect age match for you." She began shuffling through the papers with the efficiency of someone who had been planning this moment for months. Professional profiles, family backgrounds, educational certificates. It was like reviewing a job application, except the job was being my husband. I picked up Lucas's photograph and studied it carefully. He was conventionally handsome in a clean-cut, all-American way. Clean-shaven, kind smile, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He looked stable, reliable, safe. Everything Mason wasn't. The contrast was so stark it was almost laughable. "I've already decided," I said suddenly, the words tumbling out before I could second-guess myself. "I'm saying yes." Both my parents stared at me in shocked silence. My mother's mouth actually fell open, and my father slowly removed his reading glasses to clean them, something he only did when he was trying to process unexpected information. "Ethan, you haven't even looked at the photos properly," Mom stammered, clearly thrown off by my immediate acceptance. She had obviously prepared for resistance, for the long process of convincing me that arranged marriage was a good idea. "No, Mom. I'm serious. I'm ready." I held up Lucas's photograph, studying his face again. There was something genuinely warm about his expression, something that seemed honest and uncomplicated. "When can I meet him?" Dad put his glasses back on and leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "Ethan, this kind of decision shouldn't be made in haste. If you have another relationship that you're trying to, it's over." I cut him off, my voice firmer than I'd intended. "Officially, as of today. So I'm completely free for whatever you have planned." The truth was, I felt completely numb. Mason's casual betrayal was still playing on repeat in my mind, but it felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. All I wanted was to focus on something else, anything else, to drown out the memory of his lips on another man's mouth. Mom reached over and squeezed Dad's hand, her excitement barely contained. "Lucas is available for coffee tomorrow. There's a nice cafe near your workplace. Very public, very comfortable for a first meeting." "Perfect." I stood up suddenly, eager to escape to my room and process everything that had happened in the last few hours. "I'm ready." But as I reached the doorway, Dad's voice stopped me. "Ethan, a marriage isn't an escape. If you're hurt about something, if someone has." "I'm completely fine, Dad." I turned back and gave them what I hoped was a convincing smile. "I'm just ready to settle down." It was a lie, and probably not a very good one. But sometimes lies are easier than explaining that your heart has been shattered into so many pieces that you're willing to try anything to put it back together, even if it means trusting your parents' judgment over your own. Later that night, lying in my childhood bed with my laptop balanced on my chest, I researched everything I could find about Lucas Brooks. He was an alpha, like Mason, but that was where the similarities ended. His social media presence was refreshingly normal. No shirtless bathroom selfies. No cryptic posts about relationship drama. No photos with random people draped all over him at parties. Instead, I found pictures of him at medical conferences, volunteering at animal shelters, spending time with what appeared to be a close-knit family. His posts were thoughtful without being pretentious, professional without being boring. He seemed to have actual hobbies: hiking, reading, cooking. His life looked stable, purposeful, drama-free. The contrast with Mason's online presence was striking. Mason's Instagram was a constant stream of party photos, always with different people, always in different locations. Every weekend brought a new adventure, a new group of friends, a new excuse to avoid any kind of commitment or consistency. I had always told myself that his social lifestyle was just part of his outgoing personality, that it didn't mean anything. How naive I had been. I set my laptop aside and stared at the ceiling, the same ceiling I'd stared at through countless teenage heartbreaks and disappointments. Tomorrow, I would meet the man I might marry. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe safe was better than passionate. Maybe stability was better than excitement. Maybe choosing someone who wanted the same things I did, commitment, loyalty, a shared future, was better than fighting for someone who saw relationships as temporary entertainment. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment my heart jumped, thinking it might be Mason. But when I opened it, I found a polite message from Lucas. "Hi Ethan, looking forward to meeting you tomorrow. I hope you don't mind that I got your number from my mom. See you at 2 p.m. at the Velvet Bean." I stared at the message for a long time. It was considerate, straightforward, respectful. He'd asked permission before getting my number, confirmed the time and place, and kept it simple without being cold. Even his choice of cafe showed thought. The Velvet Bean was known for being quiet and comfortable, perfect for conversation. When was the last time Mason had confirmed plans with me? When was the last time he'd shown up when he said he would? "Looking forward to it too," I typed back. "See you tomorrow." As I settled down to sleep, I tried to push away the lingering image of Mason's face when I'd walked away from him. Instead, I focused on tomorrow, on the possibility of starting fresh with someone who might actually want to build something real with me. Maybe this crazy idea would actually work. Maybe my parents' wisdom and experience could guide me towards something better than the chaos I'd been accepting as love. Maybe, for the first time in months, I was about to make a decision that was truly in my best interest. I checked my appearance in the cafe bathroom mirror 3 times before Lucas arrived. My hands were trembling slightly as I adjusted my collar, smoothed my hair, and tried to convince myself that I looked presentable, rather than like someone whose entire world had imploded less than 24 hours ago. This was ridiculous. It was an arranged meeting, not some romantic first date where I needed to make a perfect impression. But still, some part of me wanted to look like I had my life together, even if that was the furthest thing from the truth. "Ethan." The voice came from behind me as I stood near the counter, pretending to study the menu board I'd already memorized from nervous energy. I turned around, and there he was. Lucas Brooks, in the flesh. He looked exactly like his photographs, but somehow better in person. His smile seemed genuinely warm rather than posed, and there was something endearingly nervous about the way he adjusted his glasses as he approached me. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and dark jeans, professional enough to show he'd made an effort, but casual enough to keep things comfortable. His alpha scent reached me before he did, warm, clean, like sandalwood and fresh linen. It wasn't overwhelming or aggressive like some alpha scents could be. It was gentle, inviting. It made my omega instincts, which had been so raw and wounded, feel something unexpected, safe. "Hi," I managed, extending my hand for what felt like the world's most formal greeting. His hand was warm but firm, exactly what you'd expect from a medical professional. Clean, well-manicured nails. Everything about him screamed safe and reliable. "Thanks for agreeing to meet me," Lucas said as we moved toward a quiet corner table. "I know this whole situation is pretty weird for both of us." I appreciated his directness immediately. No pretending this was anything other than what it was. 2 people whose parents thought they might be compatible, trying to figure out if there was any truth to that assumption. "Honestly, I'm just relieved you seem normal," I admitted, then immediately worried that might have come across as insulting. But Lucas laughed, and the sound was genuine and unrehearsed. "Normal meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning not crazy. Not hiding any major red flags." I paused, then decided to be completely honest. "No ex-boyfriends who are going to suddenly show up and create drama in your life." "None that matter," Lucas replied without hesitation, signaling to the barista. He didn't even glance at the menu before ordering a simple black coffee. "But I should probably ask you the same question." Mason's face flashed through my mind, his casual smirk as he dismissed our entire relationship, the way he'd looked at me like I was being unreasonable for expecting basic loyalty and honesty. "None that matter," I echoed, borrowing his words because they felt safer than trying to explain the complicated mess I'd just escaped. We talked for nearly 2 hours, and it was surprisingly easy. Lucas told me about why he'd chosen medicine, a genuine desire to help children, sparked by his own childhood experiences with a pediatrician who had made hospital visits feel less scary. He talked about his family, his residency, his plans for the future. His goals were clear and achievable, his timeline realistic, his priorities refreshingly straightforward. I found myself sharing more than I'd intended about my psychology major, my plans for graduate school, my own family background. I carefully edited out any mention of Mason, any reference to the heartbreak that had led me to this cafe, any hint that I was here as much to escape my past as to explore my future. Can I ask you something personal? Lucas's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Sure. Are you doing this because you actually want to? Or because your parents want you to? It was a loaded question, one that required more honesty than I was prepared to give. I found myself staring into my coffee cup, watching the foam swirl as I tried to formulate an answer that was truthful without being completely revealing. I guess, I finally said, I'm ready to settle down. And I think my parents probably have better judgment than I do when it comes to compatibility. That's refreshingly honest. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. I'm doing this because I want a real partnership. Companionship. I'm done with dating drama. What kind of dating drama? My last relationship ended because he wanted me to sacrifice my career for his dreams. He thought being a doctor was too demanding, that I should consider something with more work-life balance, so I could be more available for his artistic pursuits. Lucas shook his head, a trace of old frustration in his voice. That's when I realized I wanted someone who appreciates stability rather than seeing it as boring. Stability. The word resonated with me more than I'd expected. After months of Mason's chaos, the last-minute canceled plans, the mysterious busy periods, the constant feeling that I was competing with everyone and everything else in his life for attention. The idea of being with someone who actually valued consistency seemed revolutionary. So, Lucas said with a smile, should we try this? Take it slow, obviously. Get to know each other properly before making any major decisions. I nodded, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I'd like that. As we walked back to our cars, I found myself genuinely optimistic for the first time in months. Lucas was kind, stable, honest about his intentions. There were no games, no hidden meanings in his words, no need to decode his behavior or wonder what he was really thinking. Everything about him was straightforward and genuine. I had a really good time, he said when we reached my car. Would you like to do this again? Maybe dinner next week. I'd like that too, I replied, and realized I actually meant it. Lucas smiled and started to turn away, then hesitated. Ethan, can I say something? Of course. I know this isn't exactly how most people meet their potential partners. But I want you to know that just because our parents introduced us doesn't mean I'm not genuinely interested in getting to know you as a person. This isn't just going through the motions for me. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had spoken to me with such honest intention? When had someone last made it clear that they were genuinely interested in who I was, rather than what I could do for them? Thank you for saying that, I managed. It's not just going through the motions for me, either. As I drove home, I found myself smiling, for the first time since yesterday's devastating scene with Mason. Lucas was everything Mason wasn't: considerate, reliable, emotionally available. He showed up when he said he would, said what he meant, and seemed to actually want the same things I wanted. Maybe this arrangement could work. Maybe choosing someone based on compatibility rather than chemistry wasn't settling. Maybe it was just smarter. Maybe the butterflies and passion I'd felt with Mason had been warning signs rather than proof of true love. My phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Thanks for a lovely afternoon. Looking forward to next week. Sleep well. Simple. Sweet. Considerate. No games. No wondering what he meant. No anxiety about whether I'd hear from him again. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without my stomach in knots, without wondering what tomorrow would bring, without the constant underlying anxiety that had become my normal state with Mason. Maybe safe was exactly what I needed. 3 weeks of regular coffee dates passed, and I was beginning to realize that spending time with Lucas was actually enjoyable, not just tolerable or pleasant in the way I'd expected from an arranged situation, but genuinely fun. He had an unexpected sense of humor, the kind that crept up on you with subtle observations about daily life that would leave me chuckling long after we'd parted ways. Our conversations flowed naturally from light topics to deeper discussions about our goals, our fears, our perspectives on everything from career ambitions to favorite movies. Most importantly, Lucas was predictable in the best possible way. When he said he'd meet me at 3 p.m., he was there at 2:55. When he promised to text after his shift at the clinic, my phone would buzz within an hour of his getting home. There were no games, no mysterious silences, no wondering where I stood or what mood he might be in. For someone who had spent 2 years walking on eggshells, this consistency felt revolutionary. "You seem different," my roommate Chloe observed one Thursday evening as I got ready for another date with Lucas. She was curled up on our couch with a textbook, but I could feel her watching me as I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. "What do you mean, different?" I asked, though I was already bracing myself for her analysis. Chloe had a psychology background and never missed an opportunity to practice her observational skills on me. "Happier. More relaxed." She marked her place in her textbook and gave me her full attention. "You're not checking your phone every 5 minutes anymore. When was the last time I heard you stress about someone not texting you back?" "I was never unhappy," I said defensively. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they weren't entirely true. The constant anxiety I'd lived with during my relationship with Mason, the wondering, the second-guessing, the feeling like I was always one step behind in some game I didn't understand, had become so normal that I'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. But Chloe was right. When Lucas texted me now, I smiled instead of feeling that familiar spike of anxiety while I analyzed his tone and wondered what he really meant. His messages were straightforward, warm, and exactly what they appeared to be. Tonight was our first proper dinner date, and Lucas had chosen a small Italian restaurant that wasn't trying to be the fanciest place in town, but had a reputation for excellent food and an intimate atmosphere. When I arrived, slightly nervous about this step up from our usual coffee meetings, I found him already seated at a corner table, reading something on his phone, but immediately putting it away when he saw me approaching. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late," I said as I settled into the chair across from him. "Traffic was worse than I expected." "You're exactly on time." Lucas smiled, and I noticed he dressed up slightly for the occasion. A navy button-down that brought out his eyes, sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly strong forearms. "I got here early because I was excited." That word hit me like a small revelation. Excited. When was the last time someone had been genuinely excited to see me? With Mason, our meetings had always felt like they were happening around the edges of his real life, squeezed in between more important obligations, always subject to cancellation if something better came up. "How was your day?" Lucas asked, and I could tell from his expression that he was genuinely interested in the answer, not just making polite conversation. "Stressful," I admitted, grateful for his easy listening manner. "Work has been hectic, and I'm trying to balance everything. Long shift, but good." He paused, then studied my face. "You know, I was thinking about that while I was getting ready tonight. We both have demanding schedules, but somehow we keep making time for each other. I like that about us." Us. The casual way he said it made something warm unfold in my chest. There was no hesitation, no qualification, just a simple acknowledgement that we were becoming a unit. "Actually, can I tell you something?" Lucas's cheeks flushed slightly pink, which I was learning was one of his tells when he was about to say something that mattered to him. "Of course." I told my parents that I'm serious about you. The color in his cheeks deepened. I mean, if that doesn't make you uncomfortable. I know we haven't really defined what this is yet. Serious. 6 weeks ago, that word would have sent me running. After Mason's casual approach to everything, the idea of someone being serious about me should have felt overwhelming. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time: security. What did they say? I asked, surprised by how much I genuinely wanted to know. They want to meet you officially. I mean, not just the casual introduction we talked about. Lucas leaned forward slightly, his expression hopeful but careful. But only if you're comfortable with that. No pressure. I realized then that no pressure was practically Lucas's catchphrase. And the contrast with my previous relationship was stark. Mason had created pressure in every situation: urgent decisions, dramatic declarations, constant tests of my commitment and devotion. Everything with him had felt like an emergency that required immediate resolution. I'd like to meet them, I said, and meant it completely. I'd really like that. After dinner, Lucas walked me to my car. The October evening had turned genuinely cold, and when I shivered slightly in my light jacket, he immediately began shrugging out of his own coat. I'm fine. I started to protest, but he was already draping it around my shoulders. Ethan, he said softly, his hands lingering on my shoulders as he adjusted the collar. Let me take care of you. Small things. Something shifted in that moment. The jacket smelled like his cologne, clean and warm and comforting. And the simple gesture felt more intimate than anything Mason and I had shared in months. This wasn't about grand romantic gestures or proving anything to anyone. It was just Lucas wanting to make sure I was comfortable. Thank you, I whispered, and found myself stepping closer to him instead of pulling away. Can I ask you something? Lucas's voice was quiet, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard from him before. Always. Can I hug you? The question caught me completely off guard. He was asking permission for something that should have been natural, automatic. But after months of Mason taking physical affection for granted, grabbing me when he felt like it, initiating contact without considering whether I was in the mood, Lucas's careful consideration felt revolutionary. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Lucas gently wrapped his arms around me. The hug was warm and secure, with no hidden agenda, no expectation of anything more. Just comfort, just connection, just two people who were genuinely happy to be in each other's space. I really like spending time with you, Ethan, he whispered against my ear, and the honesty in his voice made my eyes water slightly. Me too, I admitted, and for the first time in months, I meant it completely. As I drove home in his jacket, surrounded by his scent and the memory of his arms around me, I realized that what I was feeling wasn't just gratitude or relief. It was the beginning of something real, something that had nothing to do with escaping my past and everything to do with building a future I actually wanted. I was peacefully working on a project in the reading lounge of my favorite cafe when Mason suddenly appeared at my table like some recurring nightmare I couldn't shake. There had been no warning, no text message, no gradual approach. One moment I was alone with my notes, and the next he was pulling out the chair across from me, as if he had every right to disrupt my carefully constructed new routine. Ethan, we need to talk, he announced, settling into the seat without waiting for permission or even acknowledgement from me. The sight of him sent an unwelcome jolt through my system. He looked exactly the same. Messy dark hair, that confident smile that had once made my Omega heart race, wearing a vintage band t-shirt I'd bought him for his birthday last year. But now, instead of fondness, I felt something closer to irritation mixed with a healthy dose of anxiety. His alpha scent, once so familiar, now carried an edge of something I didn't trust. We have nothing to talk about, I said firmly, immediately beginning to pack my things. But before I could stand up, Mason's hand shot out and caught my wrist. His grip was just firm enough to stop my movement. "Don't touch me." The words came out as a sharp whisper, and I was acutely aware of the other patrons around us, some of whom had looked up from their own work to watch our interaction with undisguised curiosity. Mason released my wrist immediately, but he didn't move from his chair. Instead, he leaned forward with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, something that looked almost like desperation, though I wasn't sure I trusted my ability to read his emotions anymore. "I heard you're getting an arranged marriage," he said, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that would have been almost comical under different circumstances. "Is this because of what happened between us?" The question was so loaded, so full of assumptions about my motivations and his own importance in my life, that I had to take a deep breath before responding. "What happened between us?" I repeated, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "You mean when you cheated on me publicly and then gave me a lecture about how love doesn't mean ownership?" "I made a mistake, Ethan." Mason's voice dropped to an urgent whisper, and he leaned even closer. "I realize that now. I've had time to think, and I miss you. I miss us. Us." The word hit me like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories, good ones and bad ones, all tangled together. Us when we were actually us, when I thought we were building something meaningful together. Not us during those final months, when I was constantly anxious, always wondering where he was and who he was with, feeling like I was fighting for scraps of attention from someone who was supposed to love me. "It's too late, Mason," I said, standing up and gathering my things. "I'm happy now. With some stranger your parents picked out for you?" His tone shifted then, becoming bitter and mocking in a way that reminded me exactly why I'd been able to walk away from him in the first place. "Come on, Ethan. That's not real love. That's just settling." The word settling hung in the air between us like an accusation. Part of me wanted to defend Lucas, to explain that what we had was built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, that choosing someone who actually wanted to be with me wasn't settling, but rather the opposite. But I realized I didn't owe Mason any explanations about my choices. "Maybe settling is better than being heartbroken every other week," I replied, adjusting the strap of my bag and preparing to leave. "Maybe stability is better than passion that comes with lies and betrayal." "You don't mean that." Mason stood up too, effectively blocking my path to the exit. "Remember our first date? Remember how you told me you'd never felt a connection like that before?" Despite my best efforts to stay detached, I felt those old wounds beginning to reopen slightly. He was right about that first date. It had been magical in a way that seemed almost impossible in retrospect. We'd talked for hours over dinner, then walked through the district until nearly midnight, both of us reluctant to end the evening. I'd gone home feeling like I'd found something special, something worth protecting and nurturing. But then I thought about Lucas's gentle hug, the way he'd asked permission before touching me, the genuine excitement in his voice when he talked about introducing me to his parents. I thought about how I'd felt walking to my car in his jacket, surrounded by his scent and the certainty that he would do exactly what he said he would do. "I remember," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "I also remember how you made me feel crazy for asking basic questions about where you'd been. I remember how you made me feel like I was asking too much when all I wanted was honesty and consistency. Ethan, I'm engaged now, Mason." It was a lie, but not by much. Lucas and I hadn't made it official yet, but the direction of our relationship was clear enough that the statement felt more like a prediction than a fabrication. "You need to move on, like you already did months ago." I stepped around him and walked toward the exit, my hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. Behind me, I could hear Mason calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't afford to let him pull me back into that cycle of drama and uncertainty, not when I was finally building something healthy and stable. Once I was outside, the cool air hitting my flushed cheeks, I immediately pulled out my phone and called Lucas. I didn't even think about it. It was pure instinct, reaching out to the person who had become my source of comfort and security. Hey, Ethan. Everything okay? Lucas's voice was filled with immediate concern, probably because I never called him during work hours unless something was wrong. Can you meet me? I just need to see you. Of course. Where are you? I'm at the reading lounge. But anywhere else, just anywhere that feels safe. I'm leaving the clinic right now. Stay exactly where you are, and I'll come pick you up. 20 minutes later, Lucas's familiar sedan pulled up to the curb where I'd been waiting, trying to process what had just happened and why I felt so shaken by an encounter I'd handled reasonably well. I slipped into the passenger seat, and Lucas immediately noticed my emotional state without me having to say anything. What happened? He asked gently, reaching over to take my hand in his. The contact was grounding, reassuring in its simplicity. Mason showed up at the lounge, I said, intertwining my fingers with his and drawing strength from the connection. Your ex? His thumb traced slow circles on the back of my hand. He said I was settling for you. Lucas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful and thoughtful. Are you? I looked at his face. Honest eyes, genuine concern, no manipulation or hidden agenda, and felt the last of my uncertainty dissolve. No, I said firmly, meaning it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. I'm choosing better. 3 months passed. Winter arrived, bringing snow and the kind of cold that made you appreciate warm blankets, hot chocolate, and someone to share them with. Lucas and I had fallen into a rhythm. Dinner dates, lazy evenings at his apartment, Sunday mornings that stretched into afternoons. He'd met my parents, and I'd met his. Both families had given their enthusiastic approval, but we hadn't said the words yet. I love you. They hovered between us, unspoken but increasingly obvious, like a question both of us were too careful to ask first. That changed on a snowy December evening. We were at his apartment, sitting on the couch with a movie playing that neither of us was watching. I was leaning against his shoulder, his arm around me, his alpha scent warm and comforting. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the room. Ethan, Lucas's voice was soft. I need to tell you something. I sat up slightly, turning to face him. His expression was serious, but not frightened. The look of someone who had been carrying something for a while and had finally decided to put it down. I love you. 3 words. Simple. Direct. No games, no manipulation, no conditions. I know we started this because our parents arranged it, and I know that's not the most romantic origin story. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between coffee dates and lazy evenings and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, I fell in love with you. My throat tightened. Tears pricked at my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen. I love you too, I said, and the words came out thick with emotion. I wasn't sure at first. I wasn't sure if what I was feeling was real or if I was just grateful for someone who treated me well. But it's real. You're real. And I love you. Lucas's smile was blinding. He pulled me into his arms, and I buried my face against his chest, breathing in his scent, sandalwood and warmth and home. I want to marry you, he whispered against my hair. Not because our parents arranged it, because I want to, because I can't imagine my life without you. I pulled back just enough to look at him, at this kind, steady, wonderful alpha who had shown me that love didn't have to hurt, that safety wasn't boring, that choosing someone who chose you back was the most romantic thing in the world. Yes, I said. 1,000 times yes. He kissed me then, soft and sure, full of promise. And when he pulled back, his eyes were bright. We're really doing this, he said. We're really doing this. I agreed. The engagement was announced a week later. Both families gathered at my parents' house for dinner. My mother's cooking, my father's nervous energy, Lucas's mother already asking about flower arrangements and guest lists. Mason's final text came that evening. Saw your engagement announcement. Congratulations. You deserve happiness. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling an echo of old emotions. Not longing, exactly, but a kind of melancholy recognition of how much had changed. Mason's brief acknowledgement felt like a final closing of a chapter I'd already moved past. A belated blessing on the choice I'd made to walk away from chaos and towards something healthier. I deleted the message without replying. That part of my life was finished, and I was grateful for the wisdom I'd found in learning to recognize the difference between love that depletes you and love that sustains you. 6 months later, on a warm June afternoon, I stood at the altar in a simple gray suit, watching Lucas walk toward me. He was beautiful, more beautiful than I'd ever seen him, in a navy suit that brought out the warmth in his eyes. His smile was wide and genuine, and his alpha scent was soft with emotion. The ceremony was small, just family and close friends. No drama, no spectacle, no performance. Just two people who had found each other in an unconventional way and decided to build a life together. When it came time for vows, we decided to write our own. Lucas went first. "Ethan," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "When my mother first told me about you, I was skeptical. I'd been hurt before, and I wasn't sure I believed in the kind of love that lasted. But then I met you. And somewhere between coffee dates and lazy evenings and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, I realized that I wasn't settling. I was choosing. Choosing you. Choosing us. Choosing a life that feels more like home than anything I've ever known." He took my hands. "I promise to be your partner in everything, in joy and in sorrow, in health and in sickness. I promise to respect you, to cherish you, to always show up when you need me. And I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that you are loved. Not because you were arranged for me, but because you are you." I was crying. Of course I was crying. "Lucas," I said, my voice thick. "I came into this afraid. Afraid of being hurt again. Afraid of trusting someone new. Afraid that I was somehow settling for less than the passionate love I'd once believed in. But you taught me that passion isn't the same as chaos, that safety isn't boring, that someone who respects you and shows up for you and chooses you every single day, that's not settling. That's winning." I squeezed his hands. "I promise to be your partner, your confidant, your home. I promise to support you in your work, to laugh with you in the good times, to hold you in the hard times. I promise to choose you, every day, for the rest of my life." The officiant pronounced us married, and when Lucas kissed me, soft and sure and full of promise, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. 1 year after the wedding, I woke up to the sound of Lucas moving around our kitchen, the gentle clinking of dishes, the rich aroma of coffee, the soft hum of him humming to himself. Our kitchen, our apartment, our life. Even thinking those words still gave me a small thrill of contentment. "Good morning." Lucas smiled when I appeared in the doorway, wearing one of his old medical school t-shirts and a pair of pajama pants. He was standing at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes while managing to look completely put together despite the early hour. "Coffee's ready, and breakfast will be done in about 3 minutes. "Thank you," I murmured, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind and pressing my face against his shoulder blade. The gesture had become natural over the past year. This easy physical affection that required no negotiation or careful timing. With Mason, I'd always been conscious of his moods, trying to gauge whether touch would be welcome or seen as clingy. With Lucas, affection was simply part of our daily rhythm. "Excited for today?" he asked, leaning back against me as he transferred the perfectly golden pancakes to our plates. Today was the joint family dinner, where both sets of parents would finalize the last details for our first anniversary celebration. A year ago, when I'd first agreed to this arranged marriage setup, I thought I was using it as an elaborate form of escapism. Now I realized I'd somehow stumbled into exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the person I was meant to build a life with. Nervous, I admitted, tightening my arms around him slightly. But good nervous. Like the kind of nervousness that comes with anticipation rather than dread. Lucas turned around in my arms, his hands automatically settling on my waist in a way that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Ethan, can I tell you something? Always. I replied, and meant it. One of the things I loved most about Lucas was his habit of asking permission before sharing something important, creating space for real conversation rather than just assuming I was ready to hear whatever he wanted to say. I love you. The words were simple, straightforward. But he waited for my response without desperation or the need for immediate validation. There was confidence in his declaration, but also patience. The kind of emotional maturity that comes from someone who understands that love is both given and received, not demanded or extracted. I love you too, I said, meaning every syllable. This wasn't the desperate, consuming love I'd felt for Mason, the kind that left me constantly anxious and uncertain. This was something steadier, more secure, but no less passionate for its stability. It was love that grew stronger with time rather than burning itself out in dramatic highs and devastating lows. Later that evening, surrounded by both our families in my parents' dining room, I felt a completeness I hadn't known I was missing. Lucas's hand was warm in mine under the table while our mothers enthusiastically discussed flower arrangements and menu options, their excitement infectious as they planned what was clearly going to be a beautiful celebration. Our fathers had bonded over their shared interest in baseball and were debating statistics with a kind of easy familiarity that suggested they genuinely liked each other. Ethan, my mother whispered to me when I followed her into the kitchen to help clear the dinner dishes. You look so happy. Completely different from a few months ago. She was right, and I knew it. Looking back at the person I'd been a year ago, anxious, heartbroken, settling for scraps of attention from someone who didn't value what we had, felt like remembering a different lifetime. The transformation had been gradual enough that I hadn't fully noticed it happening, but the contrast was undeniable when I really stopped to consider it. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Lucas patiently listening to my father's lengthy story about his college baseball career, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in details that most people would have found boring. There was something profoundly attractive about watching the man I love treat my family with such respect and attention, not because he had to, but because that's simply who he was. Ready to plan our anniversary? Lucas's voice came from behind me as his arms encircled my waist, pulling me back against his chest in the familiar embrace that had become home to me. Ready to plan a life, I corrected, turning in his arms to face him and reaching up to cup his face in my hands. The anniversary is just the party we're throwing to celebrate what we've already built. I kissed him then, soft and sure, surrounded by the warmth of family and the certainty of a future that felt both exciting and secure. Lucas's lips curved into a smile against mine, and I could taste his contentment, his joy, his absolute commitment to what we were creating together. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that look like giving up, but are actually about choosing yourself. A year ago, I thought I was settling for a safe option, trading passion for stability, making some kind of emotional compromise. I'd been wrong about almost everything. I hadn't settled. I'd chosen someone who chose me back, consistently, honestly, and completely. The arranged marriage had brought me Lucas, but Lucas had brought me something I'd never experienced before, the kind of happiness that didn't require constant maintenance or vigilant protection. Happiness that grew from compatibility and mutual respect, that deepened with shared experiences and common goals, that felt sustainable in a way that dramatic passion never could. As we rejoined our families in the living room, Lucas's hand warm in mine, our future spreading out ahead of us like a promise, I realized that the best decision I'd ever made wasn't just walking away from chaos. It was walking toward peace. And finding someone who understood that peace didn't mean boring. It just meant right. The first year of marriage passed in a blur of small moments and quiet joys. We settled into a rhythm that felt less like adjusting to something new and more like coming home to something I hadn't known I'd been missing. Mornings with coffee and the crossword puzzle, evenings with takeout and terrible reality TV, weekends spent hiking the trails behind his parents' property or curled up on the couch with books and blankets and no particular place to be. Lucas worked long hours at the clinic, and I had my graduate school commitments. But we made time for each other, always. That was the difference. With Mason, I'd been constantly fighting for scraps of attention, trying to squeeze myself into the margins of his life. With Lucas, there were no margins. I was his life, and he was mine. "You're staring again," Lucas said one evening, not looking up from the medical journal he was reading. I was curled up on the other end of the couch, ostensibly doing my own reading, but my book had been open to the same page for 20 minutes. "I'm admiring." "Same thing." "No. Staring is passive. Admiring is active. There's intention behind it." He finally looked up, and the smile that spread across his face was the one he reserved just for me. Warm, slightly crooked, impossibly fond. "You're impossible. And yet you married me. And yet I married you." He set his journal aside and reached for me, pulling me across the couch until I was settled against his chest, his arms wrapped around me like I was something precious. Happy. I thought about it. About the life I'd once imagined for myself, the dramatic love story, the passionate declarations, the kind of romance that novels were written about. Then I thought about this, the quiet comfort of a Tuesday evening, the steady beat of his heart beneath my ear, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. "Yes," I said, "happier than I ever thought I could be." 6 months into our second year of marriage, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a look that lingered too long, a question that hovered unanswered between us. Lucas started coming home with stories about his young patients, about the parents who brought their children in for checkups, about the way some of them looked at their babies like they were the center of the universe. "You'd be good with kids," I said one night, after he told me about a particularly difficult case involving a premature infant. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you want that?" "Someday." The question landed in the space between us like a stone dropped into still water. We'd talked about the future in broad strokes, careers, where we wanted to live, whether we wanted to travel, but we hadn't talked about this. About children, about family beyond the two of us. "I think so," I said carefully. I never really let myself imagine it before. With Mason, the future was always too uncertain. But with you, I reach for his hand. With you, I can see it. A house, a family, the whole messy, beautiful thing. Lucas's grip tightened on my hand. "I want that too. I've wanted it for a while, but I didn't want to push. I know it's a big decision." "It is," I agreed. "But it's not a decision we have to make tonight. We have time." "We have time," he echoed, lifting my hand to his lips and pressing a kiss to my knuckles. We didn't rush. That was one of the things I loved most about our relationship, the way we could sit with a decision, let it breathe, let it become part of the landscape of our lives before we acted on it. We talked about children over the following months, in the car, on the couch, during lazy Sunday mornings when neither of us wanted to leave bed. We talked about logistics, how it would work with our careers, where we would live, how we would manage. We talked about fears, about whether we'd be good parents, about whether we were ready, about whether we could give a child the kind of life they deserved. And through all of it, we talked about us, about the partnership we'd built, about the trust and respect and love that held it together. "I think we're ready," Lucas said one night, as we lay in the dark, his arms around me, the city quiet outside our window. "I think so too," I said. We adopted a year later. A baby girl, just a few weeks old, with dark hair and a fierce cry, and a scent that was already starting to settle into something uniquely hers. I remember the first time I held her. The social worker had placed her in my arms, and she'd looked up at me with unfocused eyes and stopped crying. Just like that, as if she already knew. Lucas was beside me, his hand on my back, his scent warm with emotion. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is," I agreed. We named her Lily. It was my grandmother's name, and it felt right, something old and something new, a connection to the past and a promise for the future. The first few months were chaos, sleep deprivation, endless diaper changes, the constant low-grade anxiety of keeping a tiny human alive. But there were also moments, tiny perfect moments, that made it all worthwhile. Lily's first smile, the way she reached for Lucas's finger with her whole hand, the sound of her laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep and joyful. "You're a natural," Lucas said one night, watching me rock her to sleep. "So are you." He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around both of us, his chin resting on my shoulder. "We make a good team. The best." Lily was 2 when we started talking about a second child. "Are you sure?" Lucas asked. 2 is a lot more than 1. I know. I was watching Lily play in the backyard, her dark curls bouncing as she chased a butterfly. "But I think she'd be a good big sister." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "Then, let's do it." The adoption process was smoother the second time around. We were approved more quickly, matched with a baby boy when he was just a few days old. We named him Oliver, after Lucas's grandfather, a man he'd always admired. Oliver was different from Lily, quieter, more serious, with a way of watching the world that made him seem older than his weeks. But when he smiled, his whole face lit up, and I understood again why people kept having children, despite the sleepless nights and the chaos. "They're going to run our lives," Lucas said, watching Lily try to feed Oliver a cracker. "Probably." I leaned into him. "Worth it, though. Completely worth it." When Lily was 4 and Oliver was 2, I received a letter. It was in my mailbox at the university. My graduate research had evolved into a teaching position, and the handwriting on the envelope was immediately familiar, though I hadn't seen it in years. "Mason." I stared at the envelope for a long time, wondering if I should open it, wondering if I wanted to know what he had to say. In the end, curiosity won. "Ethan," the letter began, "I don't expect you to respond to this. I don't even expect you to read the whole thing. But I needed to write it. For myself, if not for you." He wrote about regret, about the years since we'd parted, about the way he'd watched my life from a distance, social media, mutual friends, the alumni newsletter. He wrote about his own failures, the way he'd treated me, the way he'd taken me for granted, the way he'd convinced himself that our relationship didn't matter until it was gone. "I'm not asking for another chance," he wrote. "I know I don't deserve one. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. The way I hurt you. The way I broke something that could have been beautiful. I'm sorry. I'm more sorry than I know how to say." He ended, "I hope you're happy. From what I've seen, you are. And I'm glad, genuinely glad, that you found someone who treats you the way you always deserve to be treated." I set the letter down and stared out the window of my office. Lily and Oliver were in the backyard with Lucas, their laughter drifting up through the open window. I thought about Mason, about the pain he'd caused, the years I'd wasted on someone who didn't value me. And I thought about how little that pain mattered now, how small it seemed compared to the life I'd built. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Instead, I went downstairs, joined my family in the backyard, and let the sound of their laughter wash over me. 10 years after that first coffee date at the Velvet Bean, I stood in the kitchen of our house making breakfast, while Lily and Oliver bickered over whose turn it was to feed the dog. Lucas was at the table reading the newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, because he was old-fashioned that way, with a cup of coffee in his hand. "You're burning the pancakes, Dad," Lily informed me. I am not. The smoke alarm disagrees. I looked up. Sure enough, a thin wisp of smoke was rising from the stove. Lucas chuckled and came to my rescue, taking the spatula from my hand. Go sit down. I've got this. I can make pancakes. You can't. But you won't. He kissed my temple. It's your day off. Let me take care of you. I let him. We ate breakfast together. The four of us crowded around the kitchen table, talking over each other, laughing at nothing. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. Afterward, we went for a walk in the park, the dog pulling at his leash, Lily and Oliver running ahead, the sun warm on our faces. Lucas laced his fingers through mine. Happy, he asked. I looked at him, at my alpha, my husband, my partner, and smiled. More than I ever thought possible. Good. He squeezed my hand. Me too. The sky was blue, and somewhere in the distance a bird sang. This was our life, messy and complicated and full of love, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.